13,000 years ago, on a frozen plain in what is now North America, a hunter stood his ground. In front of him, an 8-ton mammoth began its charge. The ground shook, the air filled with the sound of splintering ice and a roar that must have felt like the end of the world. Your ancestor did not run. He did not throw his spear. He planted the butt of the weapon in the frozen dirt. He angled the razor-sharp Clovis point, a piece of engineered stone more valuable than his own life, towards the oncoming beast. Then he waited. He let the animal kill itself. This is the conclusion of a study published in the journal PLOS ONE by a team from the University of California, Berkeley, led by researcher Scott Byram. Their experiments revealed something your intuition would reject. The force of a human arm throwing a spear is an order of magnitude less than the energy of a charging mammoth. A thrown spear might have been nothing more than a pinprick, a fatal irritation for the hunter, not the hunted. A planted spear, a pike, turned the animal's own immense weight and momentum into the killing force. Once the stone tip pierced the hide, the engineered mounting system behind it activated. The spear tip behaved like a modern hollow-point bullet, creating a devastating wound channel. This was not a weapon you threw away. This was a weapon you trusted with your existence, a calculated bet that your nerve would hold longer than the charge of a god. That technique did not appear from nowhere. The dark intelligence behind it had been evolving for 2 million years. Your earliest ancestors were not the unstoppable force they would become. They were small-brained ape men, Homo habilis, creatures barely 5 feet tall. They lived on a continent ruled by saber-toothed cats, giant hyenas, and crocodiles the size of small trucks. For decades, the official scientific consensus was that these early humans were not hunters at all. They were scavengers. How could a creature with a brain half the size of yours, armed with nothing but a sharpened stick, possibly compete with the apex predators of Africa? The answer, it was assumed, was that they could not. They waited for lions and leopards to finish their kills. Then they crept in to strip the remaining scraps of meat and crack open the bones for marrow. Then a forensic detective story unfolded in the dirt of Tanzania that shattered that assumption forever. At a site in the Olduvai Gorge, anthropologist Professor Henry Bunn of Wisconsin University analyzed a massive butchery site dating back over 1.8 million years. The carcasses of wildebeest, antelopes, and gazelles had been systematically stripped of their meat. Bunn was not interested in the cut marks on the bones. He was interested in the teeth. By studying the teeth of the butchered animals, he could determine the age of the prey. What he found was a pattern that did not match any known predator on the landscape. Lions and leopards target the old and the weak. Your ancestors had brought back animals in their prime. They were not picking over the leftovers of a more powerful killer. They were selecting what they wanted and killing it themselves. But the way they killed is what rewrites everything you thought you knew about your past. A forensic team in Germany, led by researcher Sabine Gaudzinski-Windheuser from Johannes Gutenberg University, examined the bones of 2 deer killed 120,000 years ago at a site called Neumark-Nord. The bones carried puncture wounds that could only have been made by a wooden spear thrust upward with immense force. There were no impact fractures from a thrown weapon. The angle of the wounds told the rest of the story. The spears had been driven into the animals from below, striking their chests and bellies. This was not a long-distance kill. A Neanderthal hunter had been close enough to smell the animal, to hear its panicked breath, to see the white of its eye before driving the weapon home. The study, published in Nature Ecology and Evolution, concluded that these humans approached their prey with a level of nerve that you would struggle to imagine. Neanderthals did not throw their spears, they thrust them. This method demanded a terrifying intimacy with the kill. A bison or a woolly rhinoceros, wounded but not dead, could turn and gore a hunter in a heartbeat. The only way this worked was through absolute cooperation. One group of hunters would manipulate the herd, triggering a panic that funneled the animals into a narrow valley or a marsh. Another group lay in wait. They trusted the plan, knowing a wall of muscle and horn was about to crash directly into them. They weaponized the landscape itself. Mark White, Paul Pettit, and Danielle Shreve published an analysis in quaternary science reviews examining 5 Neanderthal kill sites across Europe. At each one, the topography was the decisive weapon. The hunters used narrow side valleys, steep hillsides, and dead-end marshes as natural traps. Your ancestors did not read the landscape. They had learned to write a death sentence with it, again and again, for hundreds of thousands of years. But their weapons went beyond stone and muscle. 300,000 years ago, in a cool, forested landscape that would one day become Germany, a hunter carved a weapon that defies everything you thought you knew about the Stone Age. It was not a thrusting spear. It was not a stone-tipped javelin. It was a carefully balanced, 77-centimeter-long wooden throwing stick, shaped and sanded to be thrown not at an animal's chest, but at its legs. Annemieke Milks, a researcher at the University of Reading, led a team that subjected this artifact to three-dimensional microscopy. The study, published in 2023, revealed tool marks made by a craftsman who understood aerodynamics and weight distribution. This was someone who knew the behavior of prey animals with an intimacy that borders on surgical. The stick was designed to be thrown like a boomerang, spinning low and fast to smash into the legs of a fleeing deer or horse. It would not kill the animal. It would trip it. It would shatter a leg bone and send the creature crashing to the ground, where waiting hunters could close in with their thrusting spears. This was not a weapon of brute force. This was a weapon of pure, calculated intelligence, designed to neutralize speed by breaking the machinery of movement. The Schöningen throwing stick is one of the oldest hunting weapons ever discovered. It tells you something dark about your ancestors. They did not chase animals. They engineered their helplessness. This is the Neanderthal mind, not the grunting brute of old textbooks. A mind that could hold a three-dimensional map of a landscape in memory. A mind that could predict how a herd of bison would react to a single hunter approaching from a specific angle. A mind that could communicate that plan to others and trust them to execute it while standing in the path of a living avalanche. Imagine the trust required to stand in that trap. You hear the panicked thunder of hooves growing louder. You see the first animals burst into the clearing, their eyes white with terror. You know that if the plan fails, if the herd panics in the wrong direction, you will be trampled into the mud. You hold your ground. You thrust your spear upward into the chest of a creature 10 times your weight, close enough to smell its breath, close enough to see the life leave its eyes. This was not a hunt. This was a ritual of cooperation, a sacrament of shared danger that bound these people together. They killed not as individuals, but as a single, multi-limbed predator, thinking and moving as one. The dark intelligence that planted the pike had grown a new dimension. It had learned to trust. It had learned to love. Now picture what you think the persistence hunt looked like. A lone runner, glistening with sweat, chasing an antelope for hours under the savanna sun until the beast collapses from exhaustion. This has become one of your favorite stories about your species. It tells you that you are noble endurance athletes, that your ability to run forever is what made you human. The forensic evidence from the kill sites tells a different, darker story. A study published in Nature Human Behaviour in 2024 documented nearly 400 cases of endurance pursuits by indigenous peoples globally. The data spans the 16th through the 21st centuries. The practice exists, but the same study confirmed what skeptics have argued for decades. Persistence hunting was rare. Other methods dominated the historical record. Kara Wall-Scheffler, a biological anthropologist at Seattle Pacific University, has pointed out that the technique was likely never a powerful force in your evolution. The Hadza hunter-gatherers of Tanzania do not persistence hunt. They run in short bursts while hunting small game. The San people of the Kalahari sometimes chase antelope until they drop, but this is the exception, not the rule. What the bones at Olduvai Gorge suggest is something more pragmatic and more brutal. Henry Bunn believes your ancient ancestors relied more on intelligence than on persistence. They ambushed their prey. They delivered a mortal strike with a spear. Then they followed the wounded animal for miles as it slowly bled out. This was not a noble marathon. It was a grim, bloody track of a foregone conclusion. The animal was already dead. It did not know it yet. The romance of the lone runner is a story you tell yourself. The bones tell a different story, one of ambush, of a mortal wound delivered from a hidden position, and of a slow, inevitable pursuit that was less a chase and more a formality. But the darkest chapter was still ahead. 10,000 years ago, in what is now southern France, a tribe of modern humans prepared a hunt that would feed them for an entire season. They did not craft new spears. They did not stalk a single weakened animal. They read the landscape and saw a weapon that had been millions of years in the making. A limestone cliff 100 feet high, standing at the edge of a migration route that reindeer had followed for millennia. The plan was not to kill an animal. The plan was to kill an entire herd. Archaeologists excavating the base of this cliff uncovered a scene of almost incomprehensible destruction. 350 pairs of antlers, 5,000 reindeer molars, thousands of vertebrae and foot bones shattered and piled together in a huge fire pit. Part of a mammoth skeleton lay among the carnage, caught in the same death trap. The hunters had orchestrated a stampede, using fire and noise and an intimate knowledge of reindeer behavior to funnel the panicked herd towards the cliff edge. The animals at the front would have seen the drop and tried to stop. The weight of the hundreds behind them made stopping impossible. Imagine the sound: hundreds of hooves drumming the frozen earth, panicked breaths misting in the cold air. Then a sudden, terrible silence as the leaders realize there is no more ground. The unstoppable river of muscle and antler behind them pushes the front line over the edge. Bodies piled up at the base, a mountain of broken bones and tangled antlers, enough meat to feed a tribe for an entire season. A single event, planned and executed with the precision of a military operation, had turned a migration route into a slaughterhouse. The intelligence that planted the pike and read the landscape to trap a bison had scaled up. It had learned to think not about killing an animal, but about killing an entire population. This was not a hunt. This was a harvest, a systematic extraction of life from the landscape that would become the signature of your species. This was not one tribe in one place on one occasion. This was a pattern that repeated itself across continents and millennia with the cold precision of a natural law. A groundbreaking study from Tel Aviv University, led by Professor Ran Barkai and Dr. Miki Ben-Dor, analyzed thousands of animal bones from dozens of sites across the Southern Levant. The data spanned 1.5 million years. What they found was not random. It was a sequence. At the beginning, the bones were from 12-ton straight-tusked elephants. These animals provided 90% of the meat early humans consumed. For hundreds of thousands of years, this was the target. Then, around 500,000 years ago, the elephant bones vanish from the archaeological record. Your ancestors did not stop hunting. They moved down the list. The next layer of sites is dominated by the bones of wild cattle and horses, animals weighing around 1 ton. These sustained the ancestors of Neanderthals and Homo sapiens for another 100,000 years. Then these too became scarce. The pattern is unmistakable. Your ancestors would arrive in a region, systematically hunt the largest available animal to the point of ecological collapse, and then switch to the next largest species. Each switch required a technological leap. Wooden spears were sufficient to bleed out a trapped elephant. Killing a fast, skittish deer required something new: the bow and arrow, the atlatl. Each extinction event forced the human brain to solve a harder problem, and it did. Each extinction was not a catastrophe for the hunters. It was a prompt, a technological challenge. The same mind that engineered the helplessness of a deer with a wooden throwing stick simply engineered a new solution when the old prey vanished. The system does not feel guilt. The system solves the next problem. This relentless, systematic extraction of the largest available resource is not a bug in your operating system. It is the operating system, and it did not stop at the edge of the Levant. When Homo sapiens walked into North America 13,000 years ago, they found a continent teeming with animals that had never seen a human before. Mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths the size of elephants, saber-toothed cats, short-faced bears that stood 11 feet tall and could run at 51 kilometers per hour. These animals had no instinctive fear of the two-legged predator. They did not run. They did not hide. They watched as the newcomers arrived with their pikes and their traps and their cliff jump strategies. And then they died. Archaeologist Christopher Moore from the University of South Carolina used a forensic technique normally reserved for crime scenes to analyze blood residue on ancient Clovis spear points. The results confirmed what the bones had been whispering for decades. These weapons had been driven into mammoths and mastodons and giant bison. The extinction wave that followed your arrival in the Americas was not slow. It was a geological heartbeat. 78 species of megafauna weighing over a ton vanished. The drive that unmade a world did not vanish with the megafauna. It specialized. The brain that planted the pike, that read the landscape to funnel a herd, that tracked a wounded animal for miles until it collapsed. That brain is your brain. The circuitry that chose to exterminate the largest animals on Earth, to harvest an entire species from a continent, is still inside you. It sits silently beneath your neocortex, waiting for a problem it was built to solve. The dark drive is not a relic, it is the engine of your civilization.